Okay, welcome everybody to this ASME Bitesize session. I'm Kevin Brandon, Director of Membership, and we're delighted to welcome Monique and Abigail this afternoon. The session today will last approximately 45 minutes. If you have a question you'd like to ask, please do use the chat field. Features available at the bottom of the screen, hopefully that you'll be able to find it. And do remember to ensure you post to everybody so that attendees and panelists and everyone can see your comments and questions. If we don't get time to answer all the questions, we'll provide a document after the webinar with any questions we're unable to address. The chat field is available also for you to contribute to the conversation, and we are hopeful that we'll be able to invite participants to unmute and comment and engage with the presenters towards the end of the session. The session is being recorded, and a video of the webinar will be made available on the ASME website along with any other supporting material. And closed captions are available during this session and can be managed by you as a participant by clicking on the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen. If you have any technical problems, we ask that you make ASME aware by emailing events@asme.org.uk rather than adding it to the comment field. And with all that, that's the housekeeping underway, and I'll pass straight over to Monique and Abigail. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us. We're really excited to be here. So I'll start by introducing us. I'm Abby Konopasky. I'm the Director of Medical Education, Research, and Scholarship at Geisel School of Medicine. But prior to that, I was at Uniformed Services University, and that's where I met Monique, who is just a couple months away from being Dr. Monique Johnson, a medical student at Uniformed Services University. And our talk today is about cross-racial mentoring relationships, particularly in the realm of publishing. So we have no conflicts of interest, nothing to disclose, and these opinions are our own, although sometimes we think they should be the opinions of other people as well, but that's the way it is. So this is the plan. We're going to introduce stories. We'd like to hear your stories of mentoring to begin really briefly, and then we'll talk about our story. And then we're going to talk about how we together develop this thing that we call authentic dialogue, which includes to work together in cross-cultural mentoring, which includes honest and vulnerable sharing of each of our backgrounds and contexts, supporting each other's voice, but particularly Monique's voice as the mentee, acting to disrupt unjust structures by making a plan, and then we'll have some discussion and questions. So we wanted to start by asking you either in the chat, or you can unmute and share, to share one thing you love about being mentored and one thing you love about mentoring. Feel like it was your time. Yes, yeah. I love that. I have that same feeling with my mentors, that this is about me. Yep. Being mentored, gaining insight. Yeah. And paying it forward. Yeah, there's a almost like a you know, a moral piece in there, that this is we're building on the gifts and resources that were given to us. Getting input, helping others. Sharing in a safe space and making a difference. That safe space is key, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. And making a difference, we'll talk about that for sure. That for us, we talk about it as disrupting. When I mentor, I get to give someone else time, and time is incredibly valuable for sure. Yes, time is like one of the central resources of the Academy. Time and space to think about careers and opportunities. Yep. That idea of a longitudinal relationship is huge, right? Like that relationship of a semester, for instance, is wonderful, but that idea of a longitudinal relationship across time and even across institutions, it can be really powerful. Insight and a different perspective. Yep. Yeah, so mentoring, and both being mentored and doing mentoring can be incredibly rewarding experiences. Sometimes folks might find it difficult to do what we in the literature call cross-cultural mentoring, and that's what we're going to talk about today.
So I just wanted to thank everyone for participating thus far and sharing what it's like to be mentored or to mentor. So before we go any further, I want to share our story, so Abby and I's story. So we actually met for the first time last year in France, best place to meet, obviously your mentor, but we actually started our relationship in 2020. And it wasn't me actually seeking out a mentor. I was actually applying to a health professions education program at my school at the time. And through my personal statement, Abby was like, we can publish this. Let's do that. I've never published anything before this. And I was like, are you sure it's a personal statement? This is not what I typically see in journals. But she said, let's do it. So went through with that process, worked on the publishing piece, eventually submitted it to a journal. And the reflection that we got, or the feedback, was revise and resubmit. And this was my first time publishing, and I was just floored, because as any, writer, you think that whatever you write is the best thing since sliced bread. It should be framed and put on a wall somewhere. But in addition to that, this narrative in particular was personal. It was my personal experience, the racist experiences I had going through medical school. And so some of the responses were triggering, to say the least. And at one point I was like, I don't even want to go through this again. I don't want to revise and resubmit. That was like a no to me. And then actually, in going to Abby and talking to her about what I was feeling, we got to a point where eventually it was published, and then we did another piece together. So that was kind of the synopsis of the story. And that is the kind of framework we're going to use to go through what we call the authentic dialogue.
I framed it. It's on my wall, Monique, no worries. But we want to start by sort of stepping back a little bit from a broader perspective and talking about the challenges to publishing, especially for a Black woman, that intersection of what can be racial oppression and gender oppression. So we want to talk a little bit about that. First, there's the problem of racial trauma. Racial trauma can be defined as race-based stress when Black, Indigenous, or people of color react to dangerous events and real or perceived experiences with racial discrimination. In other words, it doesn't have to be an experience that you had, but can be one that you witnessed, can be traumatizing as well, especially sort of having the same identity, or feeling that you have the same identity with the person who experienced that. Racial trauma can lead to hypervigilance, to emotional and physical exhaustion, to withdrawal. And in the paper that Monique published, which is a single author paper, she is like hardcore, published in TLM, she talks about some of those experiences as the only African-American woman in her medical school class when she walked in that first year. So publishing for a Black woman comes with an increased risk of that kind of trauma, right? Interestingly, I find that the editorial and review process are actually, despite the fact that they're editorial processes, what comes out of them are actually relatively unedited, right? We've all gotten unedited comments that we think, gosh, like, did you really just say that to me? And so oddly, despite the fact that it's in an editing world, that you can there can be more microaggressions and those sorts of experiences. Also, for some Black women in medicine, they have less social and cultural capital in that world of publishing. They're new to it. They have fewer resources for negotiating it, and that can be difficult and traumatizing and challenging. There's also this notion of a zero-sum epistemology that can be difficult. And this is from an article called Dismantling the Master's House by Patton and a bunch of other folks, that was published, I think, just last year. And what they talk about is this idea that a zero-point epistemology is this idea that there is an objective truth, there's a neutrality that can be reached, and that it is reached mostly through quantitative methods, and therefore those methods are privileged. And if you're telling a story or doing qualitative work, that those things are are seen as not starting at the 0 point. And so you have to push harder and explain more and put in more effort to explain why these perspectives and these approaches might be valuable. There's also another challenge is the sort of myth of meritocracy and imposed silence around racism. One view of the publishing process is that it's neutral, right? It's peer reviewed. And this peer reviewed process is an objective process that moves us through from manuscript to publication. But it's not objective, as nothing involving humans really is, or even machines that humans build. And also the idea of a blind review, even if that is still there, isn't always necessarily true. Like we've all, again, had that experience where we've done a blind review and we know, oh, I know who that is, right? So all of that combined can be really challenging and leading to the outcome that Black women's voices in medicine are extremely underrepresented. There's an article that I think it's the Joseph et al. That talks about Black women who are publishing about the identity of being Black women, either themselves or qualitative research. And the article found that they tended to be in more low impact journals. They experienced, and that they experienced a lot of pushback about their views from editors and reviewers, and they felt like their work wasn't valued. So it can be challenging to publish.
And so with all of those challenges, this cross-cultural mentorship relationship had a profound impact. Like it's part of the reason, well, it is the reason that we're presenting here today. Like I couldn't believe that I'll be in the US presenting to you guys in the UK about a project that I did a couple of years ago. And so some of the goals that we identified are authentic dialogue, disruptive outcomes. So disruptive outcomes include actually publishing, speaking engagements, just opportunities to excel in the academia. And then also building that academic currency. So using authentic dialogue to create disruptive outcomes and build academic currency for your mentees. And so with authentic dialogue, we actually didn't have a framework of doing this until we sat down and reflected and went, oh, that's what we kind of did. And how can we use this as a framework to help others with their relationships as well? So we have 4 steps that we think are crucial to having authentic dialogue in a cross-cultural relationship. So the first one is honest and vulnerable sharing of reactions on both sides. And so I won't go too much into detail because we break down each of these steps a little further as we go through. The second one is giving background and context for those reactions on both sides. The third piece is making room for voice. So voice, not just the actual manuscript or whatever is trying to get published, but just that space to speak with your mentor and your mentee. And the fourth piece is coming to a common plan based on your mentee's goals, and then just taking into account the institutions of power at play.
So we were interested as we started to look at the literature, and we're actually pointed to this by a colleague that we're writing with now about this very issue, Anna Cianciolo, who's the editor-in-chief at Teaching and Learning in Medicine, that there actually is some evidence for this, what seems like a very similar process in the literature. This is what we're calling a sister concept, this idea of a pedagogy of radical honesty. And so I'll just read this. Radical honesty as a politics of truth is a feminist transgression of the highest order. It demands that scholars of color acknowledge the failings of an academic system within which we remain engaged, recognize our vulnerabilities, and most importantly, share with colleagues and students our strategies for self-care and self-love. And while they talk about radical honesty as an intra-group experience among these Black feminist scholars, we found that actually this is sort of what we were doing between the two of us with a white mentor and a Black mentee. And so the 3 parts of it are truth telling, which is being honest about stereotypes and racialized and gendered assumptions and examining the history of those assumptions. And that's sort of like our honest and vulnerable sharing. Valuing narrative and personal experience, so giving space to vocalize truths and connect the dots between the individual and group experiences of disempowerment and the sort of institutional and systemic analyses of racism, which is akin to our sort of sharing background and context and making room for voice. And then acting. Our final one is acting. They talk about building tools for truth in action and the importance of theory influencing practice, both inside and outside the ivory tower. And that's our planning stage, our planning for disruption.
And so now we're going to go through the steps individually using as an example, excuse me, going back a little bit. There we go. Using as an example, the piece that is now published, but how we got to that point. So first, honest and vulnerable sharing. So my experience was that this is something that I'm writing, a very personal experience, and you're going to tell me that I don't really feel that way. Like, I should look at the literature and how other scholars have felt and tell me I should frame it in that manner. So I felt like it was a personal attack. I felt rejected. I felt like this is why I don't want to publish anymore. And it kind of just confirmed the idea I had in my head about publishing. And then when I say honest and vulnerable sharing, I want it to be known that Abby wasn't the first person I even talked to about this. Like, I went and ranted to other people because I had to test the waters. I wasn't sure if, Abby was going to respond in a way that was going to be pleasing. I didn't know she was going to be like, yeah, you're crazy, you're overreacting, just confirming what they were saying. So the first step for me was being able to trust Abby enough to share with her how I was feeling. And then she's going to go over her experience.
So my experience as a privileged white scholar was that actually the editor and reviewers gave her great feedback, that this kind of thing is just part of the publishing process. This is what happens. And at first I sort of was like, well, this is the typical novice researcher. Somebody sort of vomited red ink on my page and I feel bad about it, right? But there's where it was really important, both for Monique to share first and for me to recognize that she was indeed testing the waters. And so it was really important how I responded. So I actually did share this with Monique, but I shared it with the caveat that this was my privileged perspective. And so I've also done some advanced work on my own racism and privilege. So I was there in dialogue, ready to be wrong, basically. So in terms of these strategies for honest and vulnerable sharing, the first is that safe space for the mentee to share. And part of that is building a relationship. I have this wonderful mentor who will not, until the first 5 minutes of any meeting have gone by, will not talk about any work-related stuff. If you try to do it, she says, we're catching up. Right? So that relationship building piece is really important to build on, and to signal as a mentor, to signal to Monique that it's safe in that I am aware of my own privilege, I'm aware of racism, and while I may step on my toes and her toes, and I'm sure I have and continue to do so, that I'm open to my own wrongness, right? Letting the mentee speak first is important, and really honestly valuing and listening and being open to that perspective, and stepping away from your ego to be able to hear. I think if anyone hasn't read, there's a wonderful book called Mindful of Race. I think it's Ruth King who wrote it. It's about mindfulness around racism, which really has helped me along my process. And this is a quote from the great Monique Johnson. Authenticity is a choice, so show up as you. Remember your value in that you bring value whenever you show up in a space. And so I feel like my job as the mentor is to make it easier for the mentee to make that choice of authenticity, especially when I know they've been burned before.
And then so we move on to step 2, which you combine with the honest and vulnerable sharing, which is giving background and context. So this is really important because if I just, for example, in the example we're providing here, if I just said, this is how I feel and didn't provide context of, hey, Abby, this is how I feel because I am a Black woman, I am a student, I've never published before, like these are the things that are leading me to feel this way, that would not give Abby an opportunity to address each of those things or to even consider that those are the things that are leading me to that decision. Also, prior to this, I was actually working on a study about the experiences of Black medical students in my school. So I don't think that was submitted yet, but it definitely hadn't been published yet. So I was already dealing with, being the only Black woman in my class of almost 200 students. So all of these things culminating together led me to feel this way. And so it was important for me to give that information to Abby so that she will understand where I'm coming from. Sometimes I think when we live our own lived experiences, we forget that others don't experience the same thing. So unless we kind of provide that insight for them, they can't possibly see what we're going through as well.
For sure. And I gave my own background and context as well, including my privilege, not just as a white woman, but my academic privilege. My grandfather was an art history professor and chair of the school of his school at Hofstra University. And my grandfather used to play this game with us, this game called Cocktail Party, where he would bring up a word that none of us knew, none of us, the grandchildren knew. And then you had to pretend, now we would all play it because we got drinks and snacks, not alcoholic drinks, bummer, but we got drinks and snacks, and we would play it. And the idea was that you had to pretend like you knew the word until you knew it. You won the game if you made a statement indicating you knew the word. You lost the game, you were out if you made some sort of gaffe, like, heads up, we all lost all the time. But I was actually practicing for the academic world starting at like age 4, right? So I have this amazing privilege vis-a-vis academia. And so I shared that with Monique just so she would understand my background and context. I also tried to share a little bit of my experiences with the publishing process, having been through it a lot, and trying to think sort of what do I know that I don't realize that I know that I can share with Monique so that she can exercise her agency better in this space. And then the context for reviews, right? So while indeed there are reviews that and reviewers that microaggress, that cause racial trauma, there's also the fact that there's a review or two everywhere for everyone, right? And so trying to have Monique also sort of understand, like, listen, this can be a brutal process. That doesn't mean that there's not racism baked into it here too, but there's also all this other brutality that unfortunately can be baked into the process as well.
And in addition to that, Abby, like the other piece of the background that I shared with Abby was that my parents are immigrants from a small country. So first generation born in America, they don't know anything about the school system. So I made it to medical school through, help of others, obviously, but a lot of it has been on my own, and you face different attacks. And so it's just like, oh my gosh, again, like I'm trying to move forward and try something I've never done. And it's like feeling that you've been beaten down. So here we go over strategies for giving background and context.
Yeah. So I think one of those strategies, which I've mentioned before, is recognizing your own privilege. And I've done that through reading, but I also do that. I have a couple of colleagues and friends who are white like me and who push me or sort of say, could you be feeling this for this reason, who really sort of push me on my own internalized racism. Reflecting on publishing as like most enterprises in our society as having racist roots, and questioning, right? Okay, so we've always done it this way in publishing. Is there a reason why we are going to continue to do it this way? So sort of questioning the norm.
And then it also took multiple sessions of us meeting to get to this point. It wasn't just the first time I spoke with Abby after getting the review that it was just, wow, we had this magical transformation of thought and processes and all these different things. So it started off the first time of me kind of just venting and being like, hey, Abby, this is how I feel. I don't want to do this again. Thanks for your help, but no thanks. And then Abby sharing her, well, this is Monique, this is normal. Like, it's fine. Like, we're fine. Then we come back together and it's like, actually, you know what? Hey, Abby, I thought about the fact that you said, revise and resubmit, that's kind of a normal thing. Let's kind of move forward. How do we move forward? All right, Monique, I see what you're saying that you feel this way. That's kind of, actually, I looked back at the decision letter and I kind of see where you're coming from with this piece here. So it took multiple sessions of us talking and Abby asking questions and saying, why do you feel this way? Where is this coming from? Okay, what do you want to do? What is your goal? Different questions. And it provided a space for me to reflect on why I was actually feeling a certain way and how to articulate that to another person. And it also just brought together this idea that context is everything. So people can get the same letter and respond completely differently, but based on the background and the context in which it's happening, they receive it differently. So just keep that in mind when you have that relationship with your mentee or mentor. And then so step 3 is voice, written, and oral. So this was really important in terms of maintaining my voice. So I could have definitely said, all right, Abby, you know what, you're right. We can revise and resubmit. This is normal. Let's just do whatever the revisions say to do, which is what I thought I had to do, because it did, even though it said, we request you do X, Y, Z, that looked like you better do this to get published. And so that was part of the conversations that I had with Abby, like, they're saying this is how I feel, or they're saying this is this, but that's not what I want to say. And so working with Abby to say, okay, what do you want to say? And how can we look at the reviews and make sure that your voice is maintained, like your message and what you want to say is being put out into the world.
And I love this quote from a recent article by Sharma, where I think actually the clinical and the educational encounter can sort of be switched out. Much like the colonial encounter, there's no lack of voice in the clinical/educational encounter. Rather, certain voices are given authority, legitimacy, and permission to speak, while others are not. Right? In medical institutions, the permission to narrate, decide what's said, when, and how, and authority to document and interpret often lie with the educator. This grants the educator an astonishing degree of power. Spaces can either be created for the learner's narrative, or that narrative can be controlled and silenced. And so my voice, part of this was considering the role of my voice, even if I don't mean it to be, as having that authority, and therefore trying to intentionally build up Monique's authoritative voice.
And so for our strategies for maintaining voice, both written and oral, is first, as an author or as the mentee, figure out what it is that you want to say. What is your message? And this can be helped through the questioning of your mentor. Because if Abby had just asked me, what do you want to say? I would have probably been like, I thought I wrote it. I don't know. I'm not sure anymore. But through different reflective questions, she helped give me that agency and that power to say, I hear them, but this is what I want to say. How do we make sure we're in the realm of, addressing their concerns, but maintaining, this is what I want to say. This is my message. So defining that with your mentor and moving forward in that way.
Also, I think the oral voice is really important. And so making space for that. And I often acted as the scribe. Right. So I would say, tell me about it, just talk it through. And then I would type out some of the things that Monique was saying. And then I would read some of it back to her and she'd say, oh, did you write that? I'd say, no, you just said that. Right. So using that oral voice to support some of the written stuff. Also providing time and space. This isn't about efficiency, right? So you have to be able to give some time to this relationship and to this process. If you're trying to do everything super efficiently, it's not going to work. Peter Elbow is one of my favorite scholars of writing, and he says the real problem is writers' refusal to take full and open responsibility for what they are saying. If a writer is willing to say, in effect, I'm me, I'm saying this, and I'm saying it to you, their words will not just have more life in them, they will also be clearer and more coherent. So I tried to think of my role as, how do I act as the support person to allow that authentic voice in Monique to arise?
And then the fourth step is coming to a common plan. So figuring out with Abby, what exactly do I want to do? So yes, we figured out, what do I want to say with this particular piece? But one, do I want to publish? Because I could have easily said, hey, I don't want to do this. And Abby could have supported me in that. We could have worked on another project, or different avenues could have been taken. But yes, okay, you want to publish. Is there anything else that you want to do? Do you want to present here? Like, I remember going to Abby, like, I want to present at an international conference. And she was like, Amy. So we applied to Amy, got accepted, met people from ASME, and here we are now. So that is just a piece of exploring goals and common plans together, so Abby can support me in that way. And exploring different possibilities. As I said earlier, this is something I never would have dreamed of, but just because, one, Abby has that social and academic capital that now I'm gaining through working with her and building agency and power through this academic and publishing world as well.
And so in coming to a common plan, I worked really hard to understand what Monique's goals were, not mine, right? So I have certain of my own academic goals, right? And that doesn't mean that in this relationship we don't meet any of those, but I need to really understand Monique's goals in order for us to potentially negotiate both of our goals with each other. And I think that generating of possibilities is so important. Just this idea of a commentary, like Monique said earlier, she was like, what? No, this isn't an empirical research. I was like, no, people write commentaries. There are all of these different ways that you can get your voice out there about your own experiences that aren't necessarily about empirical research.
And in addition to that, we actually wrote a commentary together called Maintaining Your Voice after this piece. So just through our conversation, we were like, hey, this is probably something that other people struggle with or other people haven't thought of. Let's publish another piece about this. And so strategies.
Oh yeah, this was you.
The plan. So maintaining the author's voice, their intention, defining those goals together. So this is meeting virtually or however you want to meet, but making sure that it's not just about efficiency, but spending the time to kind of dig deep. Because as I said, this was my first time doing anything in the academic world. So I didn't even know what the options were. As far as a journal, I thought it was like, if there was no P number or I don't even know the tables and stuff. If it wasn't quantitative, I didn't think you could publish. So this was just a new experience, and it was through multiple conversations, and at this point 3 years of working together, that we could have gotten to this point.
And then also, I think it's important to recognize the audience that the author wants to address, and how I as a mentor can help, how I was able to help Monique do that, right? That she wasn't necessarily even aware that there are multiple audiences. There's specialty audiences, there's medical education audiences, there's going outside to sort of public health. There's all sorts of places where you can tell your story, and trying to give Monique some options about where she wanted to tell it. I think this zero draft mentality is huge. When I started my dissertation way back when, I did it with the idea of a zero draft. A zero draft is a draft that you write and you commit to potentially even throwing it out so you don't even reread it. Right. So that gives you permission to just put down a bunch of junk. And so starting with that as a way to just get the words on the page. And then also the idea of reaching out to journal editors and starting a conversation. And actually, Monique and I are working with Anna Cianciolo at Teaching and Learning in Medicine. And we've had a long series of amazing conversations about the editorial practices, and TLM is going to be making some interesting shifts based on the experience that Monique had.
And I think to Abby's point, we both learned something in that regard, because actually Anna Cianciolo, she reached out to us after she saw one of our publications and said, hey, I wish you would have reached out to me. And Abby and I were like, oh gosh, we just spoiled everything. But that taught us that that's something that we never thought about, like reaching out to editors and saying, hey, this is the review or the feedback that we got. Can we discuss this over Zoom or email? Or how can we kind of talk through this to make sure that the author, everyone is safe, or all the authors are feeling safe? And so when we talk about disruptive outcomes, so the research as a coping mechanism, this is the actual piece that was published as a result of our authentic dialogue in this process that we talked about. And then the second piece that I already alluded to that Abby and I wrote together, which is maintaining your voice as an underrepresented minority during the peer review process. And then we're changing the rules, as Abby already said, and we actually wrote a piece with Anna Cianciolo about her experience going through this with us, and where she's making changes at TLM, and we hope to continue to encourage others to make changes as well. And so we had some questions for you all with the time that we have left about what are some fears that you all may have with cross-cultural mentorship or finding voice in academic publishing. So just some of the things that we talked about. So feel free to unmute and talk with us. I'd love to hear your accents, or just in the chat box as well.
Dr. Eva?
Hi, Abby, Kevin, please. Thank you both for this session. It's such a powerful reminder of the damage that any feedback process can produce, even if somebody's intent is in the right place. So very much appreciate you being vulnerable and sharing these ideas with us. one of the things you have me reflecting on is just how difficult it is to get these messages into the hands of everybody who needs them. And we offer workshops or talks like this all the time. We try to put as much information on our website as possible. We have editorials that are all trying to help people understand the process, both from the author side, from the reviewer side, etc. But particularly in our field, I think even more than traditional academic disciplines that might be within university, we have new people coming in constantly, and getting the right information and the knowledge into their hands when they don't all have the luxury of a local mentor who's willing to engage in the way that you two have described. They don't have a mentor at all. I'm just curious as to sort of your reflections on how do we disseminate this sort of guidance so that more newcomers can better understand and recognize the realities of the process, as well as trying to take steps to fix things that are concerning.
Monique, do you want me to go first, or do you want?
You can start first.
I think, I think that's part of the issue, right? So then, we write an editorial, and who's going to read that editorial? That's so how will people know that there is malleability in this process, that sort of thing? And I think by doing things like this and continuing to do them, I think by publishing those editorials, but I also think that for folks like me who have a fair amount of privilege, I try to reach out to folks to mentor as much as I can, and I actually try to target folks who are I think might be dealing with things like racism or sexism or ableism or heterosexism, and I try to reach out and develop a mentoring relationship. So I think. And that some of that may come from the fact that all 4 of my parents and step parents are therapists, but I feel like a lot of it, which tells you a little bit about me, and so it's troubling. But I think a lot of it comes from those relationships, and so just building relationships when you can, even if it's at another institution, like reaching out to other institutions. Monique, do you have thoughts?
My thoughts on it are just from my place is, one, I've gone through this process, so I kind of know. So now my job, or one of my goals, is to reach back and talk to future authors, or even people who don't consider themselves authors, and saying like, hey, you can do this. This is an opportunity. And so that's actually something Abby and I are working on now, like bringing in someone who's trying to get into medical school, has no experience doing research, but just guiding them in that way. And then another thing, Anna Cianciolo actually is doing this. So there are a bunch of conferences that, we go to all the time. And she even said, hey, Monique, if you know of any conferences where I can speak and talk to a mass of people and tell them, as an editor-in-chief, this is the process, this is what we're doing, this is how to get in this space, I think that would be really helpful. And so I'm working with her to find some conferences to speak at in a large forum. So I think those are 2 ways that we could get the message across to people as well.
Yay, Dr. Matt, Karen.
Hi, hello. Thanks for your presentation. It was really nice to see you present together and, to take it in turns so you could see that interaction and your relationship. So that was really great. And congratulations, Monique, on your publications, and well done for sticking with it. And I think your stories are really important reminder how emotive the process of publishing is. And I was really interested in you were talking about TLM going to make some shifts, and I'd be really interested in your insights into how publishing in journals, how you see that it needs to change, because I know this is a live discussion in the 2 ASME journals, and of course you have an editor-in-chief on the call, so this is it'd be great to hear your perspectives on how publishing needs to change in the future.
Oh, awesome question. I can start first, Abby. So one of the things that I think needs to change is that, especially in medical education, there currently isn't really a space for personal narratives and the experience of others. And because there isn't a space, we hold it up to the standard of like empirical work, where it needs to have this many references and it needs to have some type of framework attached to it. So I think holding a space for narratives and experiences of others, and with holding a space that includes changing or altering the type of reviews that we do, the wording of the reviews that we do. So more of a feedback type of review, as opposed to these are the things that need to be changed. Similar to writing like poetry, or, when you're putting in an essay, people don't go, you should have cited that person for what you wrote in your essay. So I think holding space in that way. Abby, what do you think?
Yeah, I think also one of the things that I've been experimenting with in some of my letters as a deputy editor is, putting a caveat in there, especially when it's around experiential piece, and especially when it's around folks who have experiences that as a privileged person I do not have. And I've been experimenting with a caveat line that says, I would like to state that I don't have these experiences. I can't understand what you're experiencing, and I'd like this to open a conversation. So please reach out, and I'd like to hear your feedback on what you think about my impressions, kinds of a thing.
And I think we were talking with Anna about the possibility of inviting authors for Zoom calls, or just to have that ability to have a person-to-person conversation about what their intention was, and discussing audience type, like just the different things that Abby and I would discuss, but doing that with an editor, because they may not have the same background as well.
That's really interesting. Thank you. And immediately my mind's jumping to practicalities, but actually what you said, Abby, about, how things have evolved to be what they are, and does that mean we should carry on with them, is important.
Right, an efficiency culture. I mean, the efficiency culture is huge, and we can't just all decide not to be efficient and not do and produce as much as we all have. And yet at the same time, that efficiency culture is often used as a tool to my mind, not necessarily in medical publishing specifically, but broadly as a tool to silence. Go ahead.
Vina, please.
Thank you. Hi, good afternoon, colleagues, and thank you so much for this really thought-provoking seminar. So just to share a bit of context, and then you get my question. So I'm from South Africa, so I really go through what you're going through, and I just want to take this to a little bit of a different dimension, to focus more on sort of like the supervisor-student relationship, so the mentor-mentee, because at some given time, a doctoral supervisor will be a mentor and a mentee. So I'm just wondering from the both of you, I mean, I love the idea of the dialogue that you constantly had. And in my mind, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I can think of many people that's not going to ever declare their privileged stance, but are going to constantly, get that. But they really are, if I can put it this way, good people, but they just have not yet done the reflection and done the work. And I'm wondering, do you have any tips or tricks for us to be able to encourage, that? And I hear you, Abby, in that and I appreciate the fact that you shared your background and you had many colleagues to chat with and friends to chat with, but that may not always be the case. And then, you have all these wonderful seminars and people attend it, but then they go home and they're back to themselves. There's no real introspection, no transformation that occurs on the deep level. Love to hear your thoughts about that. Thank you.
No, for sure. Agreed. And I think a lot of that is on me as a privileged white woman in academia, that it's my job to go around and try to recruit sort of my colleagues who I may see, like you said, are good people, really want to do the right thing and create space for their mentees, but haven't done this work. The big thing that I use, and this is just my things, I use humor and humility, right? So I'm always like, because I mess up all the time. It's like a big thing I do. My kids make fun of me for it. It's right. So I use my own sort of stumbling as a way to sort of say, listen, this is not about perfection. It's about progress, and it's about giving it a shot. So trying to make it okay to jump in and think and talk about these things without being perfect. And then I think in terms of having that group of people to talk with, that's really difficult. I had to, and my only one of the people now in my network that I've been building for like 45 years, not 45, 4 or 5, is actually in medical education. One of them is actually my brother-in-law, my sister's husband, who does this work as a geologist at MIT, right? So I think sort of being broader about that support network and thinking beyond your sort of immediate colleagues that's my thought. Those are.
I think as a mentee, I would agree with Abby, because there have been people that I've met who are, good people, and they try to mentor me, but in speaking with them, it's just not safe because they're not acknowledging their privilege. And so they can't hold space for what my perspective and my experiences. And so in those cases, the times that I've tried to encourage their introspection, it doesn't go well, and it just ends up with me feeling like drained. So I think sometimes reaching outside of that person, unfortunately, like trying to find other people, they may not be necessarily in the field that you want, but they can provide that safety for you to process certain things. And so I really do think it's on the mentor to do that introspection. Like, no one can force you to reflect. You have to want to do that.
Well, thank you both. I'm just noticing the time and thinking it's coming up to 10:02, and I feel that I know very many people have very busy calendars, and that there may well be meetings that people need to head off to. So I want to thank you both for really engaging and interesting talk, and to all those that have been joined us and participated in the session. I did say earlier that we've recorded this, so we will make the video available on our website. And please do be sure to sign up for our next ASME Bitesize session, which is taking place on Tuesday the 11th at 6 p.m. with Catherine Dominic and Dr. Stephen Gopal, who will be speaking about analysing and presenting data from a student-led education. For more details, please do visit the events page on the ASME website. But yes, let me finish by saying a warm thank you to both Abby and Monique, and I wish you every success in your publishing and medical career.
Thank you. Thank you all for having us.
Thank you.